While the first half of the Frontier War had seen rapidly changing battle lines and near-constant engagements, the later years of the conflict were defined by a brutal stalemate as the Centrum Assembly continued to reinforce the seemingly impregnable blockades and fortifications it had established to contain the Union's advance. The stalemate finally broke in the closing weeks of 0299 PCU, when the Frontier Union launched a massive and carefully planned attack intended to break through the Axios blockade and facilitate an invasion of the Centrum core worlds. The Fourth Battle of Axios was by far the largest and bloodiest engagement of the war, but by its end, the Centrum defense forces had secured a hard-fought victory against unfavourable odds, inflicting a mortal blow to the Union war machine and driving their fighting forces into total retreat. Following the battle, the Assembly advanced into the pitch darkness of the Atamara Crossroads system, where they were faced with almost no resistance. Now trapped within their own territory, cut off from their claims in the Savaris and Cardaeus systems, and with almost all of their fleet lost to battle or desertion, it was clear to the leaders of the Frontier Union that they could no longer fight on, and on the 180th of Solstice, a communique was sent from Teldrin to begin negotiations for an unconditional surrender. As the Centrum calendar moved into the dawn of a new century, it seemed clear that the long and brutal conflict had finally come to an end, but the most traumatic chapter of the Frontier War was still yet to come. On the 3rd of Equinox 0300 PCU, as ceasefire negotiations continued, a small group of courier vessels from the Frontier Union arrived at the CDF garrison base in the Atamara system. They reported to the local commander that a large portion of the remaining Union fleet had rendezvoused in secret and abandoned their postings without authorization from their government. Suspecting imminent attack, the commander of the CDF garrison sent word to the Centrum Parliament, along with a signal to the Axios system requesting reinforcements. Upon receiving the distress call, elements of the CDF First Fleet under the flag of Admiral Darius Farron consolidated and began to burn toward the Atamara system, but they had been undergoing minor refits in orbit above Axios 2 when they received word, and even at emergency speeds it would take over a day for them to reach the engagement. Fortunately, the 4th Axios Defense Flotilla under the command of Commodore Ariana Hawker was still stationed only 2 hours from the Axios Atamara driftgate, and upon receiving the signal, the Commodore quickly assembled her forces and set a course for the gate. At 4 p.m. Centrum Standard Time, the first Union ships began to emerge from the Atamara Dalstaff and Atamara Teldrin gates, and quickly began to overwhelm the picket defense boats and fighter squadrons sent to meet them. The local garrison sent all of what little forces they had burning toward the engagement, but were caught off guard when more Union forces began to arrive through the unprotected Atamara Saravis gate on the far side of the system. It seems the Union captains that had chosen to take matters into their own hands had been able to contact surviving crews from the former southwestern front that were sympathetic to their plan, though the exact nature of that plan remained a mystery to the Centrum Defense Forces. Shortly thereafter, Commodore Hawker's flotilla arrived through the Atamara Axios gate and immediately began to deploy into an aggressive formation. While moving deeper into the system, Hawker observed telemetry from local navigation probes and noticed that while disorganized Union forces continued to trickle into the system through all 3 gates, those emerging from the Saravis gate were not moving to engage, but rather holding position and making strange and erratic changes to their formation. To satisfy her curiosity, the Commodore ordered the CDF control station to move one of their local probes closer to the gate to provide a visual inspection. The footage revealed that the Union had boarded the gate itself and begun anchoring some of their warships to the gate's superstructure. Faced with this footage, Hawker immediately realized what was happening and established voice contact with the Union fleet. The Union officers she briefly spoke with were later described as driven beyond all reason. They and their crews were almost terminally malnourished, sustained by narcotics, and absolutely fanatical in their hatred of the Assembly. Left with literally nothing to lose, they had chosen to, in a final act of spite, weaponize a driftgate with the intention of launching an asteroid into the surface of the planet's centrum and laying waste to the home world they felt had forsaken them. Hawker knew that she could not wait for the First Fleet and needed to reach the Saravis Gate as soon as possible. But the Atamara system is famously a navigational nightmare. The lack of any local starlight leaves the entire region in total darkness, illuminated only by ships' running lights and by faint reddish scorch marks across the surface of the shattered rogue planet at its center, which itself produces a deadly stream of nearly undetectable debris that blankets the system. The grand majority of this debris is concentrated in the Howling, a constantly churning defining electromagnetic dust storm that dominates the western hemisphere of the gravity well. Unable to risk her larger ships of the line by passing through it, Commodore Hawker was forced to plot a long course that avoided the howling by moving clockwise around the rogue planet, well aware that it would place her fleet at risk from flanking attacks as Union forces continued to stream through the Dalstaff and Teldrin gates. It took over a day for the 4th Flotilla to cross the Atamara system, all the while enduring constant flanking attacks from Union forces and suffering substantial losses. Thankfully, the process of commandeering and reorienting a massive drift gate was equally time-consuming, and despite using their warship's main drives to speed the process along, the Union was still working by the time Commodore Hawker's forces entered firing range and cleared for action. Shortly after the 4th Flotilla began their attack, the CDF First Fleet arrived in the system via the Axios Driftgate. Admiral Farron had been apprised of the Union's intentions and quickly saw that Commodore Hawker's forces were becoming increasingly surrounded as they performed their delaying action. Reacting quickly, the Admiral devised a plan that would allow him to reach the 4th Flotilla in half the expected time. He detached his 2 fast attack wings, each comprised of a single Confiance-class frigate and 2 Leander-class destroyers, and placed them into a low-altitude gravitational slingshot around Atamara. This maneuver placed incredible strain on these vessels and exhausted their crews, but projections indicated they would arrive in less than 5 hours, 75% faster than a conventional burn across the system. While the 2 fast attack wings were performing their maneuver, Commodore Hawker's forces remained engaged. Typical Union tactics stretched the combat out for hours, as continual hit-and-fade attacks made it difficult for the CDF vessels to score kills. Meanwhile, Admiral Farron led his heavier ships that could not survive a slingshot maneuver of that kind toward the Dalstaff and Teldrin gates, with the intention of creating a bottleneck to stem the flow of Union vessels. Upon completing their maneuver, the 2 fast attack wings were able to draw fire away from the embattled 4th Flotilla, taking advantage of their speed to chase down smaller Union warships that escaped the reach of Commodore Hawker's ships of the line, and allowing the larger vessels to launch an attempted recapture of the Driftgate. By this point, it was clear that the Union force was too heavily engaged to begin redirecting an asteroid, but the gate was almost aligned towards Centrum, and the CDF fleet commanders were concerned that the desperate enemy might simply throw their own vessels through the gate, any of which could effortlessly shatter the planet's crust on impact when accelerated to trans-relativistic speeds. At this point, the battle degenerated into a brutal slog that continued for almost 2 days. Commodore Hawker was able to deploy Marines onto the Driftgate, where they immediately became entrenched into a fierce tug-of-war for control of the facility, losing and regaining access to the gate systems multiple times, as they were repeatedly ambushed and delayed by the guerrilla tactics of the Union militia. In the pitch darkness outside, the CDF fleet continued to suffer heavy losses as they tried to prevent any Union warships from interfering with the boarding action. All 3 vessels from Admiral Farron's 2nd fast attack wing were destroyed in action, and over 70% of the 4th Flotilla had fallen to cumulative enemy fire. The CDF attempted to take advantage of the brief interludes between Union hit-and-run attacks to cycle their crews and mitigate fatigue, but after days of incessant combat in total darkness, the CDF fleet was crippled by exhaustion, with some crews simply unable to fight on. Though pushed to the very precipice of breaking, the crippled CDF force was able to stand its ground long enough to slowly stem the tide of the Union fleet, with many Centrum vessels continuing to fight even when venting atmosphere or rendered completely immobile. Aboard the Driftgate, Commodore Hawker personally led hundreds of armed service people from her own crew in an attempt to support her faltering Marines. Eventually, the Union troops were finally defeated and control of the gate was regained, but it came at the cost of over 700 lives, including Commodore Hawker herself, who died fighting alongside her officers in the Driftgate's maintenance tunnels. Across the system, Admiral Farron had defeated the enemy around the Dalstaff and Teldrin gates, at not inconsiderable loss to his own forces. The last of the surviving Union vessels attempted to conceal themselves within the Howling, and despite orders to hold station and recover from their fatigue, the remaining fast attack wing pursued the enemy into the debris cloud to locate and destroy them. By its end, the Battle of Atamara Crossroads had lasted over 4 days. Almost 104,000 coilgun rounds were discharged, 32 ships were destroyed, including the entire Union force, and over 10,000 people were killed in action. The battle is remembered as one of the darkest days in the history of Tantalus, and served as the final installment in the litany of tragedies that defined the Frontier War. Following the battle, the ceasefire between the Assembly and Union was finally maintained, and the conflict was over, but the damage the war war had inflicted on the infrastructure and society of the already famine-stricken Tantalus cluster was irreversible. The years following the war were not marked by celebrations of victory, but by a sense of widespread hopelessness as human civilization began to cascade toward total collapse. For a time, it seemed humanity had all but quietly accepted its fate, until in the winter of 0301 PCU, a discovery was made that offered a final glimmer of hope for the humans of the Tantalus cluster.
Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. I want to give a special thanks to SpaceDock, not only for creating this amazing universe, which we are beginning to explore with the Sojourn, but also for letting me play with his creation while making today's video. If you guys are interested in the Sojourn, and trust me, you should be, I've got great news. Episode 1 just dropped on SpaceDock's channel today. Make sure you go check it out. It's super important to support creators who are making their own thing, and especially those trying to produce new science fiction. The episode will be releasing concurrently along with a Kickstarter. If you enjoy episode 1, please consider donating to support the project moving forward. I know that I will. Of course, links to everything down in the description and also in a pinned comment. As always guys, may the Force be with you.